Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
I'm Christa Carmen.
And I'm Mark, the Count Conway.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Vampire October. All month long, we will be bringing you tales of ghoulish, blood-drinking fiends. And to kick it off, we're bringing you a bonus episode on the history of the vampire film. And we are pleased to be joined today by longtime friend of the show, Mark Conway, from the Horror Movies and Shit podcast. We're going to start with the very first vampire film and go right on up to the very last, exploring the mythos, its effect on modern culture, and tell you which are the best, which are the worst, which are the funnest, the sleaziest, the sexiest, and the scariest of vampire films. So grab a pen and paper, because you may want to take some notes for your October viewing enjoyment. And now, let's get this show on the road.
Let's begin. Unlike the werewolf, which came to the world of cinema with an open mythology, ready to be given form, the vampire reached film with a set of rules already in place. As we saw last year in our History of the Werewolf film episode, it was Hollywood who gave us the silver bullet, the full moon, and the gypsy curse. Before that, werewolves were the willing henchmen of witches and the devil. But vampires reached the silver screen much in the form we see them today. Undead creatures of the night who thirst for human blood, and who must be disposed of with either a wooden stake through the heart or the light of the sun. But as we'll see, cinema has both changed and reinforced those concepts, as well as used vampirism as a form of metaphor for everything from hypersexuality, disease, and aristocratic decadence.
So technically, the first vampire film is the French Les Vampires in 1915. Though it's not about real vampires, it's about a gang of criminals who just pose as vampires. This film was a huge inspiration to Fritz Lang and Alfred Hitchcock, and being a serial which lasts 7 hours, is the longest film ever made.
Lilith and Lily from Austria in 1919 is widely considered the first vampire film. A lost film about an inventor who conjures the beautiful she-demon Lilith, who in Jewish folklore is said to be Adam's first wife. Lilith then drains his life force. So it's not a fanged, blood-sucking ghoul yet, but it is important to note that the very first vampire in a film was a seductive woman. Written by Fritz Lang, there's lots of still photos of this lost film on the internet, and it looks very creepy, but I think everything in 1919 looked kind of creepy as fuck.
Fair. And in 1921, Austria also brings us Dracula's Death, the first appearance of Dracula in a movie. The film is about a woman who, while visiting her dying father in an insane asylum, encounters a man who insists he's Dracula. This is actually a really cool sounding plot. Also, an unfortunately lost film. And as we'll see, ambiguity and the concept that vampirism might be a mental illness will be recurring themes.
And a year later, F.W. Murnau brought us the German expressionism masterpiece, Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. This was actually a very low-budget film made for German audiences. Obviously based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, they changed the name to Count Orlok to avoid legal issues, but the Stoker estate still sued for plagiarism and copyright infringement, won, and demanded all copies be destroyed. Luckily for us, several prints survived, and it's now regarded to be the template of the horror film. Interestingly, this film also brought the term Nosferatu, which was an archaic Romanian term meaning offensive one, into the horror lexicon as a synonym for a vampire. Obviously, a must-watch for any vampire lover. Great to put on in the background at Halloween parties.
Man, I fucking love that movie.
Oh, it's great.
I can't wait for Egger's version, man. It's freaking out. I saw that preview the other day. It looks so good. 5 years later, in 1927, America finally jumps into the game with London After Midnight, directed by Todd Browning, known as the Edgar Allan Poe of cinema, and featuring horror icon Lon Chaney. And while the image of Lon Chaney, wide-eyed in a top hat and cape with a mouthful of fangs, has become a common image in pop culture, unfortunately, the last known copy of the film was destroyed in a fire in 1965.
4 years later, in 1931, Todd Browning would set the gold standard with Universal's Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, who had been playing the Count on stage since 1927. While in Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula is an old man with a long white mustache and pointed gray beard, Bela Lugosi was a young and sexy, clean-shaven vampire. This is the image of Dracula that will more or less persist. This film is obviously a must-see and great spooky season entertainment.
And kind of a strange coincidence back then. They actually made Dracula a Spanish version when Hollywood was attempting to make foreign language movies for audiences. It was shot in the same sets as Todd Browning's Dracula, and at the same time, the director even watching the footage Browning shot every day and trying to recreate it for Spanish-speaking audiences. I don't know if you ever get that now.
No, I've never seen that. I didn't even know that. I didn't even see it.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
No, I haven't seen it, but apparently it's very good.
A year later came Vampire by Danish director Theodore Dreiser, who is widely hailed as one of the greatest filmmakers in history. Though Vampire is now considered a classic, it was praised by master filmmaker Tarkovsky. It was a financial failure at the time, and it got bad critical reception. It's a very surreal, very arty film, very gothic. Creepy shots of the Grim Reaper and his sickle. His face is mouthless and blank. You can find this on the internet streaming for free. It's a fun watch. Good stuff.
The Vampire Bat came out in 1933 with Fay Wray. Great score, very spooky. They had just filmed Frankenstein a year earlier, and Majestic managed to lease the German village set from Universal Studios, which gave the film a really great look, and they even got a bunch of the lab equipment.
Huh, that's interesting. I didn't realize Fay Wray was in that. I'll have to seek it out. And in 1935, Bela Lugosi is back with Mark of the Vampire. In this one, there are no real vampires, but instead, the vampire myth is used to frame Bela Lugosi for a murder because he's so spooky looking, or maybe he is a vampire. Lugosi had been fighting against being typecast, but because of his very heavy Hungarian accent, he was unable to get many parts and was forced into the vampire role.
1935 also saw the release of Condemned to Live. In this weird one, a professor whose mother was bitten by a vampire bat when she was pregnant with him goes into trances where he kills. And then he and his buddy, who's a hunchback, throw themselves off a cliff. This is a pretty terrible movie, in my opinion, especially as there's like no music. You got to have that creepy gothic music, you know? Mm-hmm. But again, we see how the vampire mythos is still very open to interpretation.
A year later, Dracula's Daughter hit the big screen, opened by an animated short, The Antics of Woody the Woodpecker. This sequel picks right up where the original left off and begins with police discovering Dracula with a stake in his heart and arresting Van Helsing for murder. Interestingly, this is one of the first films that shows lesbian themes, which becomes a recurring motif. There is even a lesbian vampire Wikipedia page. Much of this comes from the novel Carmilla, which predates Dracula and is about a lesbian vampire, and also, of course, all the rumors about the sexuality of the Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Also, the recent movie Abigail, about a little girl vampire, is a remake of this.
Oh, really? Huh.
Wait, hold on. I actually didn't. The movie Abigail is a remake of Carmilla, or no, Dracula's daughter.
Dracula's daughter. Yeah.
That makes more sense. I was like, I didn't pick that up.
I haven't seen Abigail yet. I keep meaning to.
I love it.
Yeah, it's really good.
I really liked it.
Will my 11-year-old daughter be able to handle it?
Yes.
There's a lot of gore, so she's fine with gore. I mean, it's not like super scary or anything, but there is a lot of gore.
But she'll probably identify with Abigail.
Yeah, she definitely will. She's a ballerina.
Oh, there you go.
She'll like it.
Sweet.
And after a 7-year lull, Son of Dracula was released in 1943, with Lon Chaney Jr. taking up the role of the Count. Those 7 years are obvious, as Son of Dracula has a very 40s feel to it. There's great organ music, very gothic, and the film actually takes place in New Orleans, which is always spooky fun. Unfortunately, because of the way the African-American characters are treated, it feels kind of racist today, which isn't unusual for that decade, making it awkward to kind of watch nowadays. So you might want to skip this one.
With the return of the vampire in 1943, Bela Lugosi is back. This is a fantastic film. We briefly mentioned it in our History of the Werewolf film last year, as it begins with a werewolf creeping through a London graveyard. And this is the first film where we'll see both werewolves and vampires. And it's interesting because the werewolf is actually the servant of the vampire, which harkens back to that old myth that werewolves were the servants of witches. As we'll see, eventually werewolves and vampires will become adversaries. Great movie, Halloween treat. The werewolf special effects are absolutely amazing. Bela Lugosi is at the top of his form, though behind the scenes, after being prescribed morphine for sciatic neuritis, he'd succumbed to opium addiction.
Dead Man Walk was released in 1943. This one's very fun, lots of black magic and devil worship.
House of Frankenstein, which was released in 1944, brings them all together. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman. It's an absolute classic with John Carradine playing Dracula, or Count Latos. For the first time, John Carradine, an acclaimed Shakespearean actor, accepted a role under the condition that he would be portrayed as Bram Stoker envisaged Dracula, an old man with a grey mustache. Carradine would go on to play Dracula 9 times. Great, goofy, over-the-top, gothic monster madness.
Les Vampires in 1945 is this really weird French documentary. It's got this amazing old-school black and white nature photography of seahorses, which are apparently vampiric, as well as a vampire bat sucking on a hamster, interspersed with clips of Nosferatu. It's really surreal and made more weird in the fact that it is all in French, and I had no idea what the fuck they were saying when I watched it. It's streaming on YouTube, and if you'd like to see old black and white footage of a bat sucking on the blood of a hamster, check it out.
House of Dracula in 1945 brings all the Universal monsters back again, John Carradine reprising his role as Dracula. These movies are classics, great music, so gothic, more great party background fodder.
Just 3 years later, in 1948, we got the classic comedy duo, Abbott and Costello, meet Frankenstein. An all-time classic, bringing Bela Lugosi back as the Count. Unfortunately, Lugosi had really fallen deeply into his heroin addiction at that point, and it would be the last A film he'd ever make. It would be cheap B movies for Lugosi afterwards.
This was one of my father's favorite movies. I've watched it with him tons of times, and it was also Jerry Garcia's favorite movie.
Hmm.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
My Son the Vampire, also known as Vampire Over London and Mother Riley Meets the Vampire, is a B-grade horror-themed screwball comedy released in 1952, starring Bela Lugosi as a vampire who has come to London to build a robot army. There's a lot of singing, a lot of goofiness. It has a very 1950s feel with beatnik characters. A lot of fun.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I have not seen that one. With the Turkish film Dracula in Istanbul in 1953, we have, drumroll please, the first vampire with canine fangs. While Count Orlok in Nosferatu had the rat-like front two fangs, and Lon Chaney in London After Midnight had an entire mouthful of fangs. This is the first film with the iconic canine incisors being sharp fangs, setting a standard for nearly all vampire films to come. Interesting to note, Bram Stoker never said Dracula had fangs, only that he had sharp-looking teeth. In this Turkish version of Dracula, Mina is a belly dancing showgirl in revealing outfits. Ooh la la. This is actually a really great film. Very true to the original Bram Stoker story. It's just set in Turkey. It's on YouTube. Give it a watch.
Blood of Dracula in 1957 is awesome craziness. More beatnik, juvenile, delinquent type film made by American International. And the third in their teenage monster movies, the first being probably the most famous, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, followed by I Was a Teenage Frankenstein.
And Italy jumps into the game with Mario Bava's Lust of the Vampire, also known as I Vampiri, the first Italian horror film of the sound era. Mad scientist, devil worship, sex and lust, everything you could want from a vampire film. Have you seen that one, Mark?
I haven't. I know about it, but I like Bava and I really must seek it out.
In 1957, Mexico joins in on the fun with El Vampiro, which would be the beginning of a Mexican horror craze in the 60s.
Okay, and here we get to my favorite portrayal of Dracula. Hammer Studios releases Dracula, also known as The Horror of Dracula in 1958, with the iconic Christopher Lee in the role of the Count for the first time, and the awesome Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. Absolute classic. First time Dracula appears in glorious bloody color. Hammer would of course go on to make many, many vampire movies, starring both of them and other people.
This is your favorite of them?
I love Christopher Lee as Dracula. To me, he is the iconic Dracula for me.
Mexico's The Vampire's Coffin in 1958 is the sequel to El Vampiro.
The Return of Dracula in 1958, another black and white American film where Dracula comes to California. This movie was completely eclipsed when Hammer's The Horror of Dracula hit theaters in the United States in color with Christopher Lee.
And now we get to the quality. In 1959, we have Ed Wood's magnus opus of Plan 9 from Outer Space, also known as Grave Robbers from Outer Space. Often cited as the best film ever made, correct? It stars horror hostess Vampira and professional wrestler Tor Johnson. This was technically Lugosi's last film, as Ed Wood managed to edit shots of Bella into the film, but he had actually died a few years earlier of a heart attack in August of 56. A stand-in that Wood used was a dentist who looks nothing like Lugosi, which is why he has his cape over his face through the whole movie.
I like Plan 9 from Outer Space.
I do. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Uncle Was a Vampire, or Hard Times for Vampires, is an Italian comedy, also released in 1959.
Curse of the Undead in 1959 is an old-time Western vampire film. Fun stuff if you're into rough and tumble cowboys and the undead. It is streaming on YouTube.
Italy's Blood and Roses brings in the swinging 60s, a 1960 erotic lesbian vampire film based on the novel Carmilla, like we mentioned before. In color, this is the first openly lesbian vampire film, as its predecessors just hinted at it, but didn't really show it. Good stuff.
And another 1960 Italian one, The Vampire and the Ballerina, about a group of dancers who encounter a vampire couple in a spooky castle.
And Hammer is back with a sequel to the horror of Dracula, with The Brides of Dracula, also in 1960. Peter Cushing is back in this film as Van Helsing, though, alas, Dracula never makes an appearance, so no Christopher Lee.
Mario Bava's Black Sunday in 1960, a great, very gothic film about a Satan-worshipping witch vampire who returns from the grave. Great stuff. And what is the name? Barbara Steele, right? That's the person, the actress, who is an absolute legend.
Right. The Playgirls and the Vampire, another 1960 Italian film, going right for the exploitation audience with a plot that is exactly like The Vampire and the Ballerina, but instead of ballerinas, they just have straight up strippers.
The World of the Vampires is a 1961 Mexican film with a Count Sergio, where a piece of music has the power to kill vampires, and the hero is a musician. Interesting twist on the vampire mythos.
And another one from Mexico, The Bloody Vampire, is a 1962 feature featuring a Count Frankenhusen as a vampire.
Kind of like
Frankenfurter.
Yeah. And that same year, Mexican wrestling superhero Santo takes on the undead for the first time in Samson versus the Vampire Women. This one was famously on Mystery Science Theater 3000. As we'll see, the masked wrestler Santo will go on to battle the undead many times.
Slaughter of the Vampires in 1962, another Italian horror film, where a newlywed couple inherit a Gothic castle. The film was so low budge that many of the actors were never paid.
We're back with some more Mario Bava. His 1963 trilogy, Black Sabbath. One of the anthology stories features Boris Karloff playing a Werdulak, which is a Slavic vampire.
And The Invasion of the Vampires in 1963, another Mexican film. Rob Craig in American International Pictures, a comprehensive filmography, says, quote, "It is a genuinely creepy and moving example of modern Gothic horror and maybe the showpiece of K. Gordon Murray horror canon. There is high drama, supernatural revelation, and even some sexual perversity in this strongest of Mexican horror imports. So if Mexican horror is your thing, definitely check out The Invasion of the Vampires."
In 1963, Looney Tunes joins the vampire game by having Bugs Bunny run into a vampire in Transylvania 65000.
Hammer's third vampire film, The Kiss of the Vampire, was released in 1963, unfortunately with no Christopher Lee. When a couple of tourists run out of gas, they go to a strange castle with a vampire host. How many films have the same plot? A lot.
Crypt of the Vampire in 1964 is another Italian version of Carmilla with Christopher Lee. Whoop whoop.
The classic The Last Man on Earth was released in 1964, an adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, starring Vincent Price, a science fiction story about a post-apocalyptic world filled with vampires. Matheson wrote the screenplay, but was so dissatisfied with the results that he asked to be credited as Logan Swanson. Despite Matheson's disapproval, it is today considered a classic and a must-watch for horror fans.
I think it's the best version of the three that we've had so far.
I never saw the Will Smith one.
Yeah, I didn't really like it. And a dog dies, spoiler. Anyway.
Dog always dies.
The Monster of the Opera in 1964 is another Italian vampire film involving dancers. Italians seem to love using dancers in their horror films, and why not? Why don't we see more of that?
Good question.
Yeah.
Planet of the Vampires, or Terror in Space, is 1965 Italian science fiction film where a spaceship crashes on a planet of vampires, but no dancers, unfortunately.
Ooh.
In 1965's Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, we have the first of Hammer's anthology films, featuring multiple stories. This is the tarot card one that opens with a werewolf story. The fifth story is about a vampire who tricks a guy into putting a stake into his wife's heart.
And forget about Van Helsing, because Santo, the Mexican masked wrestler, is back again, fighting the undead in Santo versus Baron Bracola in 1967.
And John Carradine is again Dracula in 1966's Billy the Kid versus Dracula, made at the same time as Jesse James Meet Frankenstein's Daughter. Both were shot in just 8 days together and shown together as a double feature.
And Christopher Lee is back with Hammer Studios in Dracula, Prince of Darkness in 1966, a direct sequel to the horror of Dracula, opening with the closing of the original film, where Dracula is turned to ash by sunlight. But Dracula is brought back to life when his ashes are eventually mixed with sacrificial blood. An awesome scene and just great gothic fun.
And showing that vampires were a global phenomenon. In 1966, the Philippines actually jumped in with their vampire movie, Blood of the Vampires, aka Curse of the Vampires. Cheap, sleazy, so bad, it's almost good.
And The Blood Drinkers in 1966 is another Filipino vampire movie that is even worse than Blood of the Vampires. It's so cheap that they tried to make it color by dyeing the film purple and blue.
Bloodbath in 1966 describes itself as a, quote, sensual saraband of the macabre, end quote, featuring Sig Haig as a beatnik. This was originally shot in 1964 by Roger Corman and a very young Francis Ford Coppola as a spy thriller, but it was deemed too terrible to release. So they used the footage they had and reshot, making it into a horror story about a murderous painter. That, too, was deemed unreleasable. So they did even more reshoots and turned it into a movie about a murderous painter who is also a vampire. All of this created a mess with continuity, one of the leads being played by 2 separate actresses, but the finished product is surprisingly quite good. It's a very fun film, very beautiful black and white shots, worth a watch, especially if you're a Sid Haig fan.
I think I actually have that movie. I think there, you used to get like the 40 movies in a DVD box set for $3 because they were all out of copyright. I think that was one of them.
It's like she comes like in a mirror. He's like a painter and she comes in the mirror and stuff. It's pretty beautifully shot.
It definitely rings a bell. I'll have to see if I still have that. Anyway, also Pakistan now gets into the game with Dracula in Pakistan, which it was released in 1967. It's the first horror movie ever made in Pakistan, and it's exactly what it says. It's just really a version of Bram Stoker's Dracula set in Pakistan. It was given an X rating, which got me to watch it. Yeah. But there was so, and Matthew doesn't care about the violence, but he was very upset that there was no sex in it, just some tame belly dancing.
Well, they said it was rated X. I was like, well, I gotta check this shit out. Next we have Herschel Gordon Lewis classic, Taste of Blood. released in 1967, where a Miami businessman turns into a vampire after drinking a couple bottles of brandy. Hey, it happens. He then goes to England to kill off the descendants of Professor Van Helsing. H.G. Lewis considered this to be his masterpiece, but in my opinion, it feels like a bad porno with, again, no sex.
Hang on, so was he just drunk and he was still drunk as he kills people off?
He drinks these two. I think like the brandy had like a curse on
potions or something.
Yeah, it was like a potion in it. Mm-hmm.
I've drank a lot of cursed alcohol in my day.
I'm surprised it's not whiskey.
The Fearless Vampire Killers, or Pardon Me, Your Teeth Are in My Neck, is Roman Polanski's 1967 horror comedy, forlornly featuring his soon-to-be wife, Sharon Tate. Screwball 60s horror fun.
Or Charlie Manson had to go ruin the goddamn thing.
And Sharon Tate is so hot in that movie.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, is there any movie that she's not, like, really attractive in?
Well, yeah, but I think that's just one that sticks out in my mind. I don't know if I've seen many more Sharon Tate movies. So
Valley
maybe
of
that's
the
the
Dolls.
one I've seen. Valley of the Dolls. I've totally seen that. Anyway, Mexico was on a roll with The Empire of Dracula in 1967. What a plot. A man searches for a vampire who killed his father to prevent him from coming back to life. But to do so, he must fight his army of beautiful female vampires who lure men to their estate so that they can feed on their blood. Sounds like a honey trap to me.
Yeah. And from Argentina, Blood of the Virgins in 1967, a more modern take on the vampire, very 60s, very colorful, very bold. And I think we're starting to see this vampires need virgin blood, and I searched and searched everywhere for where that could have come from, and I can't find anything where that is something you see every once in a while. I don't know, no idea what the origin of it is.
I did that start popping up in like Hammer horror movies?
Is it in Hammer horror movies? I don't remember that. It's in Andy Warhol's Dracula.
Well, yeah. that's a little different. It's a little
and that Jim Carrey comedy.
Last
that was.
Fight? No. What was it?
Something. We're going to get to it. So.
Yeah, okay.
Mantis in Lace. Classic sexploitation from 1968. It's described as a, quote, very strange trip with lots of tits and little sense. If go-go dancers on LSD and soft porn are how you like your vampires, check it out.
I kind of feel like Matt was born in the wrong time. I feel like Matt really should have been born like in maybe the 40s and had like his 20s in the 60s.
Yeah, agreed.
My dad used to say that to me.
So you got it. You're right on task there.
You seem to like the go-go girls and the dancing and all that sort of stuff. Anyway. All right, so Hammer are really starting to pump them out now. My favorite, Lee, is back for the third time in Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which was released in 1968, which would be the highest grossing of all Hammer's films.
The Hand of Night, also called The Beast of Morocco, is a strange 1968 British horror film with a vampire species in it.
And 1968 would see acclaimed Swedish director Ingmar Bergman use themes of vampirism in The Hour of the Wolf, an incredibly important art film starring Max von Sydow. Bergman would say the film was inspired by his own nightmares, meshed with Mozart's The Magic Flute. It is a must-watch for cinephiles and students of cinema.
Matt was waiting for us to get to this point. So not to be outdone, we go to Francais, and we have the late, great Jean Roland, or Roland. I don't really know. I've never really...
Jean Roland.
Roland. I just feel like he's French, so I have to be all Roland.
Yeah.
So his first one, which was an art housey vampire movie called The Rape of the Vampire, erotic, psychedelic, lesbian vampire, which would kind of he would redo a number of times, would quickly gain cult status, and Roland would go on to make more and more of these. And check out The Living Dead Girl, which is a zombie movie.
I really liked a lot of these. I watched like a few of them.
They're beautifully shot, but a lot of it is just people walking in like fields, and like maybe they're naked, maybe they're not, but whatever. But they are very well shot, and when they kind of get going, they're pretty good.
The first of Spanish writer and actor Paul Naschy's long string of werewolf films, The Mark of the Wolfman in 1968, features a couple of vampires in it, as will more of his films. If you listened to our werewolves episode last year, you should remember Paul Naschy.
Fangs of the Living Dead, also known as Malenka the Vampire's Niece, is a Spanish vampire film from 1969 about a beautiful countess who inherits a spooky castle full of vampires and witches. Or is it all just a hoax? Well, depends on which version you see, as there are two of them, starring Anita Ekberg, who'd become famous for playing Sylvia in Fellini's La Dolce Vita.
So this next one sounds amazing, but apparently it's so bad it's really hard to watch, which is disappointing. We're talking about 1969's nice erotic horror comedy, Dracula, the Dirty Old Man, where Dracula turns Dr. Jekyll into a werewolf.
You gotta love it.
So what happens? What happens with Hyde?
I don't know.
I
watched the preview for it. I watched the preview of it. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it was like Dr. Jekyll was. Because you think that, like, when you think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you think almost like of a werewolf type archetype, you know? Right? I don't know. More Mexican wrestling horror with Santo and Dracula's Treasure in 1969.
The Vampire Girls in 1969 is another Mexican wrestling horror film, and this one stars John Carradine as the vampire.
And another Carradine movie, which came out, I think was it the same year? Yeah, It was the same year. Is Blood of Dracula's Castle, though he didn't play Dracula this time, but the butler George. This is a cult film and a fun exploitational mess. Film takes place in modern-day Arizona, and the vampires sip blood from martini glasses and keep mini-skirted women chained to their basement for satanic sacrifice.
As vampires will do sometimes. Arizona vampires, evidently. Count Dracula in 1970 was an international movie filmed in German, Spanish, Italian, and English, starring Christopher Lee as Dracula and the notorious Klaus Kinski as Renfield. Critics have called it one of the world's worst horror films ever made.
I don't think I've seen that. I want to see that. Klaus Kinski,
I know, right?
Klaus Kinski's a fucking maniac.
He really is.
He really is. He's like nuts. Or he was.
Cult filmmaker Andy Milligan's The Body Beneath was released in 1970 about a family of vampires who moved to London in search of new blood.
And the vampires can't get away from Santo, who's again fighting them in 1970 in Revenge of the Vampire Women.
Jonathan is a German film from 1970 about a world where vampires have become immune to sunlight and taken over. And now human rebels must band together to battle for the control of civilization.
Bite Me, Darling is a German sex comedy from 1970 where the descendants of Dracula return to Transylvania to take revenge on the villagers.
Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, which sounds more like an 80s like cartoon series, is an amazing 1970 Czech art film described as a gothic, surrealistic, coming-of-age, psychological, dark fantasy horror film. I feel I need a degree to maybe watch it. The film portrays a heroine as living in a disoriented dream, cajoled by priest vampires men and women alike, blending dark fantasy, eroticism, and gothic horror as it explores lesbianism. It's really a great film if you like 70s European art house with your vampires. So definitely give it a watch. It's currently streaming on the Criterion channel.
It's really good. Hammer Studios and Christopher Lee return with Scars of Dracula in 1970.
And Hammer takes the lesbian vampire themes to new levels with The Vampire Lovers in 1970, another depiction of the novel Carmilla. This is the first in what is known as the Karnstein trilogy, as the stories revolve around the noble Karnstein vampire family and their Gothic Austrian castle. These vampires can walk in sunlight, but are susceptible to garlic.
So, but real quick, I feel like you had a lot more fun watching these movies than you did for the werewolf one. Is that true?
No, I like the werewolf one. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay. Coming up next is Count Yorga, Vampire, an interesting 1970 film. It was originally intended to be a porno, but they decided to make it a straight-up horror movie and came up with a very 70s modern gothic that upon release was praised by critics. Siskel calling it the best horror film of the year. Wow.
Yeah. Imagine that, going to make a porno and then like, well, we'll just make it a normal movie, and then it comes out and people are like, this is the greatest film of the year. Cool,
usually it's the other way around.
Yes.
Oh, this is going to suck, so we have to like put some sex in it.
The Nude Vampire is the second erotic film by French filmmaker Jean Rollins, made in 1970 after The Rape of the Vampire. It's about a cult of blood-sucking mutants. Like his first vampire film, this one was poorly received upon release, but has developed a devoted cult following. If you want psychedelic, naked French vampires, these are your movies.
Vampire in 1971, very interesting Spanish experimental film that uses behind-the-scenes footage of the 1970 Spanish Dracula with Christopher Lee and Klaus Kinski. It's kind of a documentary of sorts, as well as an introspection of Dracula and the vampire mythos. If you're a hardcore vampire freak, check it out.
1970s Dracula versus Frankenstein is a wild one featuring Lon Chaney Jr. The story takes place in then present-day Venice Beach, California, where a mad scientist working in his lab, hidden in a haunted house attraction, brings Frankenstein back to life. Throw in some outlaw bikers, Las Vegas showgirls, LSD, and a fight with Dracula, and you get the picture. Grindhouse horror fun.
And Hammer is back with their fifth Dracula movie, Taste the Blood of Dracula. Again with Christopher Lee. They're starting to hammer them out.
Oh.
Did you make yourself laugh when you wrote that?
In all seriousness, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was going to say you should have said something like another nail in the coffin.
Ooh,
we can nice. Still use that. We can still use that.
I will leave it in.
I won't even charge you for it.
And I was just going to say, in all seriousness, I have like a very beautiful. I wrote a story inspired by Hammer films for an anthology a couple years ago, and it's called "Behold the Undead of Dracula." And I bought for research this really beautiful coffee table book of all Hammer horror films. I'll have to take a picture of it. We can put it in the show notes or something. And Matt, I just have to show it to you in general because it's really awesome. We have Japan releases their first vampire film, The Vampire Doll, in 1970. Unsurprisingly, it is quite good. The Japanese have a reputation for making excellent horror films, and you can see all the elements that would later make films like The Grudge so great on display here. If you like J-horror, check out this important film. It's very creepy, extremely spooky.
So we're getting into the 70s, so you know what that means. Sleaze. And there was a movie release called Guess What Happened to Count Dracula, which has drugs and orgies in LA. It's a comically bad exploitation trash that, quote, climaxes in an orgy of blood and violence. End quote.
The Horrible Sexy Vampire is 1970 Spanish film that is not sexy but is truly horrible and so bad that it is very difficult to watch.
Jean Rollins' third French erotic
Is Jean
vampire.
Roland.
En français,
Jean Roland.
s'il vous plaît.
Jean Rollins' third French erotic vampire art film, The Shiver of the Vampires, was released in 1971. Like the other two before it, it is a psychedelic lesbian vampire cult film.
Okay, now we get the classic 1971 anthology film from Hammer, The House That Dripped Blood. It features obviously multiple stories, all written by psycho writer Robert Bloch, featuring the vampire story The Cloak, which was originally written for Unknown Magazine.
Incense of the Damned in 1971. More 1970s sleazy orgies and vampire cults. And this one is a British film and features Peter Cushing.
The Mad Love of a Hot Vampire in 1971 takes the sleaze to a whole new level by being a straight-up cheap porn movie with the classic line, Dracula's groovy, baby. And it's a baby. If you really, really want early 70s bad horror films with straight-up porn, you should check this one out. Really bad, but kind of fun. And what a title.
And Hammer's Countess Dracula in 1971 about Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Bathing in blood to stay youthful is an absolute classic, starring the lovely Ingrid Pitt as the Blood Countess. A must-see for any vampire fan.
You cannot beat Ingrid Pitt.
A nut, right? Yeah, very lovely.
So another one from Japan, Lake of Dracula, released in 1971, is more of a gothic and European feeling movie than The Vampire Doll, and it's good stuff.
And the French lesbian vampire film Daughters of Darkness in 1971 has Elizabeth Bathory coming to then modern-day France. Very well made, sleek, sexy, 70s, and French. Quite the winning combination.
So moving on from sleek and 70s, we're going into sleazy and 70s for basically the soft porn movie The Velvet Vampire, which is about vampires in Southern California desert. It looks like it was filmed on Spawn's movie.
Yeah, that's where Charlie Manson lived.
Oh, real? Is that what they yeah, it was Spawn, right? Very 70s, crude, but it accomplishes what it sets out to do.
The cult classic Let's Scare Jessica to Death was released in 1971, a low-budget horror thriller about the vampiric delusions of a mentally ill woman. It has gone on to be listed as one of the scariest films ever made. Must watch for horror lovers.
And Matt does love the vampire 70s, 60s type movies because we have Vampiros Lesbos, sexadelic dance party. It's a psychedelic Spanish lesbian vampire film. If psychedelic lesbian vampires and lots of nudity are your thing, it's actually a very well made and beautiful film. And it's free on Amazon Prime.
And the second of the Karnstein lesbian vampire trilogy, Hammer's A Lust for a Vampire in 1971, featuring a bearded Christopher Lee as Count Karnstein. Hammer is at the top of their game. Sexy, bloody, weird, great stuff.
Twins of Evil in 1971 was the final of the Count Karnstein lesbian vampire trilogy. Although it is technically a prequel and features real-life twins and Playboy bunnies Mary and Madeline Collinson.
Jean Roland. I feel like every time I say his name, I have to make it more French. Jean Roland, en français, is back with Requiem for a Vampire, or Caged Virgins, released in 1971. More weird erotic vampire artiness when outlaw damsels dressed like clowns are kidnapped by a gang of vampires. More great stuff from Roland.
That was a good one. The Return of Count Yorga in 1971, obviously a sequel to the classic Count Yorga movie.
The Omega Man in 1971, starring Charlton Heston, is another version of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend.
1971 also had the release of The Werewolf versus the Vampire Woman. It's another Nashi werewolf movie. It's a very dreamy, gothic, and beautifully shot movie.
Dracula, Prisoner of Frankenstein in 1972 is a Spanish so bad that it's good movie with a werewolf, Frankenstein's monster, and Dracula all duking it out.
Deathmaster in 1972 has a Charlie Manson-like vampire who is the leader of a hippie cult. Someone had to do it. If evil hippie vampires are your thing, you know what we're gonna say. Check it out.
Do you remember when we first met at that writing conference? I had my story idea was about
100%. It was totally vampire yes, cult, yes, 100%.
Again, Matt wants to live in the 1960s, I think. 1972's Daughter of Dracula is a French grindhouse lesbian vampire movie. Critics say it's sexploitation horror film, but it's neither sexy nor scary. And I think I've seen this one. I think there's a lot of nudity, right? In that one.
It's French. It's
maybe. Well, like Jean Roland.
That's what I'm saying. The French, everybody's naked in the French movies, right?
Yeah, Europe's much more free.
Hammer's Vampire Circus in 1972 is everything the title says, a traveling circus of vampires. They come to a Serbian village in the early 19th century. All the gothic vampire fun of a Hammer production with a circus. Cannot go wrong there.
70s blaxploitation goes vampire with Blackula in 1972, even giving it a funk soundtrack. When an African prince goes to Transylvania to try and convince Dracula to end the slave trade, the Count turns him into a vampire and seals him in a coffin, which eventually ends up in modern-day Los Angeles. This was a hugely popular film and received a Saturn Award for Best Horror Film of the Year.
Classic.
Oh, yep. Going back to a movie I referenced earlier, Dracula AD. I think it's got another name as far as, I think it was Dracula 1972.
Dracula AD 1972, yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is really into the 70s, right? So it's got all the hipsters and disco and Christopher Lee.
Can't go wrong.
Yep.
More Mexican wrestler horror with Santo and Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman in 1973.
Succula in 1973, a hardcore porno flick with Dracula getting it on, pure sleaze vampire.
Sorry, that's funny. Succula. In 1973 also, The Vault of Horror, which was a British anthology horror film based on the comic of the same name, but doesn't feature a crypt keeper. There's a vampire story called Midnight Mass from the comic Tales from the Crypt number 35.
And you gotta love that pun. Midnight Mess.
Mess. Right.
Ganja and Hess is a 1973 African-American horror film starring Dwayne Jones from Night of the Living Dead. It was later remade by Spike Lee as The Sweet Blood of Jesus.
I really like Ganja and Hess. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really worth checking out.
Is it? No, I have not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it must be good if Spike Lee's remaking it, right?
Maybe. I haven't seen the Sweet Blood of Jesus, But Ganja Hess is really good.
In Spain's Count Dracula's Great Love, in 1973, Paul Naschy takes a break from being a werewolf to portray Count Dracula.
Okay, it's the end of an era. 1973's The Satanic Rites of Dracula would be Christopher Lee's last portrayal of the Count in a Hammer film. Though he did pop up as Dracula in other productions, but this was his last one for Hammer, unfortunately. In this classic, Dracula is the leader of a satanic cult in modern-day London, and it stars Joanna Lumley of absolutely fabulous fame. And it's really good. It's one of my favorite ones from him.
Me too. And I love Joanna Lumley. I love AbFab. I love that show. Absolutely fabulous. It's a great show. 1973's Scream, Blackula, Scream is obviously the sequel to Blackula. Unfortunately, it did not live up to its predecessor and was a flop.
More pornography with Spain's The Bare-Chested Countess in 1973, about a vampire who kills by draining her victims of their life essence through oral sex. An interesting new twist on vampirism.
They should do they should do a Succula versus the Bare-Chested Countess.
There you
right?
go.
In 1973, The Devil's Plaything, which is also a Misfits song, right?
Is it?
I think so.
Unless it's...
Or maybe it's a Danzig song. Is a Swedish, German, Swiss erotic horror lesbian vampire.
More gothic lesbian vampires with the British Vampires in 1974.
For the first...
Sorry.
What were you going to say?
I almost feel you could do this podcast for two different markets. The horror and the lesbians.
It's really fascinating if you think about it. I mean, what makes vampires so susceptible to... I mean, besides the book Carmela and the Blood Countess, like they're sensual creatures. They bite you on the neck. I mean, there's a very erotic thing about vampires.
Just by virtue of the eroticism of biting someone's neck, but doing it indiscriminate of male versus female lent itself to putting that sensuality between two females on the screen. I think that's like part of it. Probably just the very beginning.
I think part of it is also to get man in to watch these movies.
Oh yeah, then there's like the whole male gaze aspect to it. Changing tides here, we have the first martial arts horror spectacular, Hammer teaming up with Hong Kong's Shaw Brothers to make a kung fu movie called The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires in 1974, getting Peter Cushing to play Van Helsing. Billed as a new dimension in black belt thrills, if you're into kung fu movies, check it out.
With Spain's The Vampire's Night Orgy in 1974, I think the title just says it all.
Evil of Dracula in 1974, the last of Japan's vampire trilogy. Most say this one was sadly the worst of the bunch. Still, if you're a J-horror fan, it's worth a look.
And Peter Cushing plays a horror actor who may or may not be a vampire in the French sexploitation musical comedy Tender Dracula or Confessions of a Blood Drinker in 1974, a truly horrible film.
Son of Dracula is a 1974 musical comedy starring Ringo Starr and featuring a whole host of monsters, not to be confused with the 1940s Lon Chaney movie of the same title. This is actually a fun, wacky movie with a great soundtrack, including I Can't Live If Livin' Is Without You, which was apparently written for the film. Great trivia for you there.
Grave of the Vampire in 1972 is based on the novel The Still of Life, written by David Chase, who would go on to create The Sopranos, and is about a woman who is raped by a vampire and gives birth to a baby who will only drink blood. An interesting motif we will actually see again later.
Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter is a 1974 Hammer film with enough nudity to get it an R rating.
The Legacy of Satan is a 1974 Andy Milligan schlock flick about a werewolf with a garden of man-eating plants who marries Dracula's daughter.
Andy Warhol's Dracula was released in '74, originally entitled Blood for Dracula. The name was changed to cash in on director Paul Morrissey's association with Warhol and the factory. The plot involves Dracula, who in this mythos must have the blood of virgin girls, moving to Italy in the 1920s in search of virgins.
Again, I cannot find where that mythology originated. If anybody knows,
Let
send
us
us
know.
a thing. Yeah. And in 1975, the iconic Rocky Horror Picture Show was released as a film version of the play, with Tim Curry playing Dr. Frankenfritter, a transvestite vampire from the transsexual planet Transylvania. Possibly the cultist cult film of all time, famous for midnight showings with crazy audience antics. If it's showing on Halloween in your town, go. Let's do the time warp again.
Deafula in 1975 is the first film to ever use American Sign Language for all the dialogue. It's black and white with a very hokey-looking Dracula, but you have to admire the cause.
Mistress of the Devil is a 1975 Spanish film based on the short story Wake Not the Dead, one of the earliest vampire stories from 1823. Has anyone read this?
I have not. No,
And I
I'm
haven't
curious,
either.
though. I gotta check
I know.
it out.
I really want to read it. Vampira, or Old Dracula, is a 1975 British comedy where an aging Dracula, played by David Nivens, heads off to Rio de Janeiro.
Dracula in the Provinces is a bizarre Lucio Fulci horror comedy from 1975 about a man who is bitten by Dracula and fears his vampirism is making him gay. It's full of weird Italian superstitions, like if you break a mirror, you have to have a virgin urinate on it to stop bad luck.
Sorry, I thought that was common knowledge. No. More erotic vampires from France again, with 1975's Lips of Blood, which had two versions. One which featured hardcore pornography.
I
Shocking.
wonder which version I would watch. Mary, Mary, Bloody Mary from 1975 is a Mexican.
You mean which one did you watch?
Mary, Mary, Bloody Mary from 1975 is a Mexican slasher film about a pretty young American painter who comes to Mexico and becomes a vampire.
The cult classic gore fest Satan's Black Wedding in 1975. Cheap and sleazy with lots of devil worshipping and very bright red blood.
Okay, our man's back again. Christopher Lee comes back in 1976's Dracula and Son, which is actually a French screwball comedy where Dracula and his teenage son moved to Paris and fall in love with the same girl. It almost sounds like a Jerry Springer in France episode.
It would be great to have Jerry Springer bring out Dracula.
And then, it's your son, and then they bring out the girl.
Yeah,
and
they start fighting. Yeah. Oh man. More European vampire comedy. Spain's Hard Times for Dracula in 1976 sees Dracula go broke from expensive land taxes, and he has got to try to make it in the world as a normal Joe.
And the legendary David Cronenberg offers his strange twist on blood drinking with Rabid in 1977, featuring porn star Marilyn Chambers. Must watch and completely different take on the idea of vampirism.
Love
and
him.
So will we talk about like vampirism and like sexual diseases or no?
Sure.
Later.
I would if it pops, go for it.
No, but I mean, it's that obvious thing, right? I mean, you could talk about AIDS or, back in the day, gonorrhea and stuff like that. I mean, sharing people's vital fluids, and then they spread it onto somebody else. So
yeah, it's one of the themes of Stoker's Dracula, of Bram Stoker,
right.
and he's got this, famously has blood transfusions in it, trying to get like the diseased blood out. And unfortunately, a lot of people see it as racism too, saying that people in Eastern Europe were dirty and unclean and were bringing disease to England. It's same with the rats, how Dracula turns into a rats. They pull into the port and all the rats come off the ship and spread disease, but
interesting.
yeah.
Anyway, and the legendary George Romero gave his take on vampirism with Martin in 1977. A really, really good movie, and should be seen by every lover of vampire films. Weird, ambiguous, arty. Romero said it's his favorite film, and it marks the first time he worked with special effects artist Tom Savini. And I feel this one is shot kind of sleazy. It's almost like a sleazy documentary. I don't know.
He made commercials first, right? So it's got that feeling like it's like a 70s TV commercial. But it's a great film. I really love it. Alucarda, the daughter of darkness, in 1977, is a legendary nunsploitation lesbian vampire film, a cult classic, and important art film. And although there's no actual blood drinking, this is a must-watch for vampire film scholars.
And if you're very smart, you can figure out that first word. Ooh.
I've got nothing.
A Dracula backwards.
Oh yeah, it's Dracula backwards.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Dracula's Dog in 1977, about Dracula's Doberman pinscher who makes its way to Los Angeles.
And unsurprisingly, we have a 1978 sexploitation movie called Vampire Hookers, which again, the seemingly everlasting John Carradine, who probably starred in a million movies, right? As a vampire who lures victims in with vampire sex workers, featuring an awesome rock and roll theme song.
I think this guy in the 1940s was an acclaimed Shakespearean actor.
I know.
Vampire Hookers.
Oh yeah, it happened. You talk about acting and like a job's a job.
That's what he said. I saw an interview with him saying that. He's like, I liked doing it. It was job's a job.
Well, Michael Caine made Jaws of Revenge. So.
I think one of the first Michael Caine movies is a horror movie called The Hand.
Oh yeah, disembodied hand. Runs around and kills people.
Yep. John Carradine again makes a vampiric appearance in Dr. Dracula in 1978.
Dracula Sucks in 1978 was a straight-up porn film that followed the classic Bram Stoker novel and featured legendary porn stars John Holmes and Kay Parker. If you like 70s pornography, Matt says check it out.
John Holmes. Kay Parker, she's...
Matt's got a lot of recommendations in this episode. Okay, let's go. Jean Roland continues with his French erotic vampire art films with Fascination in 1979.
Dracula Bites the Big Apple in 1979 was a comedy featuring Peter Lorre. This short film has quite the cult following.
The comedy classic Love at First Bite was released in 1979. An absolutely hilarious film, very well made, that unfortunately because of legal issues is very hard to find or watch these days. But great film, and if you are able to see it, do.
I love that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. It's got, what's his name in it? Anyway, in the French comedy, Nocturna, granddaughter of Dracula, the 1979 movie has the ancestral castle of Dracula converted into Hotel Transylvania, and obviously turned into a disco. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that like that's the Hotel Transylvania, which was later cartoon, right? Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, the Vampire, was released in 1979. An absolute classic featuring the infamous Klaus Kinski as Count Orlok. Definitely a must-watch.
In 1979, Hollywood went all out with Dracula, featuring Laurence Olivier and sexy 70s star Frank
Langella
Thank you.
or
Frank
Langella.
Langella as Dracula.
Man, I remember that one. You remember that?
Yep.
That was a big one when we were kids.
So in 1979, Australia brings us a new direction of the vampire film with Thirst, which is a blend of vampire and science fiction genres, influenced by the 73 film Soylent Green, as well as drawing on the vampire folklore of Elizabeth Bathory.
And boom, this was the big one for me, man. I remember watching this. Tobe Hooper's legendary take on Stephen King's Salem's Lot in 1979. Originally made for television miniseries, it was edited down and released theatrically because it was so goddamn good. Hooper eschewed the human-appearing vampire in the book for a monster akin to Nosferatu, and the remake is coming out any day now.
Yep.
Yes, and that 1979 miniseries was also a favorite of mine.
So good.
In 1980, Belgium makes the horror comedy Mama Dracula, riffing on the legends of Countess Bathory, and namely the bathing in blood aspect of the legend.
And we've been around the world, but we haven't been to Greece yet. But they jumped into the game in 1980's Dynasty of Dracula.
The Monster Club in 1980 was another British anthology film featuring several vampire stories, again with John Carradine and also with the legendary Vincent Price.
Dracula Blows His Cool, a German sex comedy from 1982.
I feel like Christa keeps getting all the really porny ones.
I got all the dirty ones. Dracula's a dirty old man. They're all in my queue.
Succula. they're although like 90% of them are like that. So
True.
And we have 1983's pretty art house movie starring David Bowie, Susan Sarandon, and Catherine Deneuve.
This is one of my absolute favorite fucking horror movies of all time.
The Hunger. Was that directed by Tony Scott?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bauhaus and that opening. The opening with Bauhaus playing Bela Lugosi's dead is just so iconic, so beautiful. Yeah, if you haven't seen this, go watch it right away. The Hunger, one of the best films ever made, in my humble opinion. Tobe Hooper again is back with Life Force in 1985, based on the book Space Vampires, which I think sums up the film. The title there, Space Vampires.
Wow, although they don't suck blood.
Yeah, they suck your life force.
Your life force. And no nudity in that movie either, right?
Glad I get to talk about one of my favorites, the absolutely awesome cult classic Fright Night, released in 1985. Who doesn't love this film? I mean, come on. Fun, great watch for vampire lovers.
Have you seen the documentary about it?
No.
It has Simon Bamford, who you probably wouldn't even know, but he played Butterball in the Hellraiser movies.
Oh, yeah.
As, oh God, what's the main character?
Roddy McDowall?
Roddy McDowall. He plays Roddy McDowall in it. As kind of like, just framing the documentary, and he is excellent, and the whole documentary is excellent. In 1985, we also saw the teenage sex comedy Once Bitten, with a certain young gentleman called Jim Carrey, revising the myth that vampires need some virgin blood.
I remember really liking that one when I was like a kid. See, was it 1985? I was really little. And Japan releases the anime Vampire Hunter D in 1985, a much beloved science fiction post-nuclear Holocaust romance, where a young woman hires a mysterious half-vampire, half-human vampire hunter to protect her from a powerful vampire lord.
Hong Kong released Mr. Vampire in 1985, based on the vampiric Chinese Jiangxi Jiangxi?
Zhongxi. I don't know.
Well, pick one of those to edit in, Matt.
Whatever.
Bringing a revival of that folklore.
Okay, now we have the iconic Grace Jones in 1986's Vamp, about a group of college students who hire a stripper who is, you guessed it, a vampire.
And with the success of the Jiangxi revival, Hong Kong released Mr. Vampire 2 in 1986.
Another one of my absolute favorites. This is one that I watch. I don't tend to watch things more than once. This one I do. The Lost Boys in 1987. Hipster vampires to Santa Cruz, California. Absolute classic.
Absolutely. And if you get a chance, go to Santa Cruz, go to the comic book store, check it out, walk the boardwalk, go ride the carousel. Great.
They're just noodles, Matt. While Lost Boys is indeed a classic, unfortunately its success eclipsed the grittier, punkier Near Dark, which came out at the same time, which I think is way better. Maybe my favorite vampire movie overall.
I'm going to have to agree with you. I think Near Dark is way better. Yeah. It's just grittier.
Well, they're kind of different in a way because I think they're aimed at different audiences.
Yeah.
So,
but Near Dark, awesome. The scene where he's in the bar, walking on the bar, cutting their throats with his spurs, and the Cramps are playing Fever in the background.
Yep. Bill Paxton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ever tell you the one about Colonel Sanders?
Yeah.
Larry Cohen brought us the bizarre A Return to Salem's Lot in 1987. So terrible that maybe it's actually pretty good.
Kind of.
I watched that back in the 80s. Didn't remember anything about it. Now, as you're older, I've come to really love Larry Cohen as a director and a writer. And I went back to this with Michael Moriarty's in it. And I'm like, this is so weird. I love it.
It's fucking hilarious.
I love it.
So bizarre.
Okay, so 1987, we have The Monster Squad, which sees a group of children battling universal monsters, including Count Dracula. It was a financial disaster, but has become a much-loved classic.
More American inappropriate teen comedy vampires with My Best Friend is a Vampire in 1987.
Hong Kong puts out another one, Mr. Vampire 3 in 1987. These films were evidently very popular.
This one I've never heard of. 1987's Central Park Drifter, which is a Canadian film about a cab driver who's also a powerful vampire.
It'd be cool if it was like the Martin Scorsese movie. Can you imagine like Robert De Niro being a vampire?
Well, you know what would be even funnier? Because it's like Canadian film. If it was like a very polite vampire. Sorry for drinking your blood.
Hey. Billy the Kid in the Green Bay's Vampire is a 1985 British independent musical fantasy horror comedy drama sports film billed as the only snooker vampire film. So if you like the game Snooker and you like vampires, I guess that would make it a must-see.
It's snooker, and I love snooker.
Snooker. Sorry. Snooker.
Okay, I'm from the UK, so.
Klaus Kinski again plays Count Orlok in Italy's Vampire in Venice, 1988, also starring Donald Pleasance. A direct sequel to Herzog's Nosferatu, Kinski caused so many problems on set, the shoot was forced to finish early.
And now we have The Cagester. Nicolas Cage in 1988's The Vampire's Kiss. It's a great black comedy, and obviously Nicolas Cage is very Nicolas Cage in it. And didn't he eat like a cockroach, like a real cockroach in that movie?
Oh I think I heard that.
I've heard this rumor.
Yeah. No, I think it's on the I think it was real. I shouldn't have made it sound like I didn't believe it. I just heard it. Because he's Nicolas Cage and he probably does that, outside of films anyway.
Well, these guys seem to think I'm focusing on porn, but I'm really just doing the history of the vampire film. Porn star Tracy Lords makes her first mainstream appearance in Not of This Earth in 1988. a comedy about aliens in search of human blood.
Fright Night Part 2, given a limited release in 1988 with little fanfare, mocked by critics, and quickly pushed to video.
I never even seen it.
Me neither.
Okay, so this one sounds a little weird. In 1989, the Croatian movie Bloodsuckers is about a vampire rapist, but it's a comedy.
It doesn't sound funny, does it?
No, it doesn't sound funny at all.
It doesn't sound funny. It's not a funny topic.
Fuck, man.
But it's become a cult classic, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it is funny.
Well, here, check this out. France made a cartoon movie about an elephant vampire called Ernest the Vampire in 1989. So if a French cartoon about an elephant dressed like Dracula sounds like your thing, check it out.
That sounds like a very good cosplay for like a horror convention that people would
Nobody
be like,
would get.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be like, what?
But we are entering the 90s. Baby Blood in 1990, an award-winning French horror film about a woman named Yonka, whose womb is invaded by a parasite that desires human blood.
Also in 1990, we have The Reflecting Skin, which is an award-winning, critically acclaimed Canadian art film with subtle themes of vampirism. If you like moody, brooding, and very dark art films, definitely put it on your list.
I loved this one back in the day. I remember it was like one of like the weird art films that you still get at Blockbuster. You know, like Blockbuster didn't have very many like cool, weird flicks, cult films. They had that for some reason. Well, check this out. Bo Diddley, Tony Basil, and Thomas Dolby in Rockula, a 1990 horror comedy with a friendly vampire named Ralph. After a very limited theatrical run, it was dumped onto video and universally ignored.
Punk band Agent Orange did the soundtrack to the erotic vampire thriller Pale Blood in 1990.
Oh, I had an Agent Orange album back in the day.
Oh, fuck yeah. I've seen them a whole bunch of times. They're one of my favorite bands, yeah.
It was what? Glistening was one of their songs? Is that right?
Southern California surf punk, dude. Gotta love it.
Sundown, The Vampire in Retreat is a 1990 Western comedy featuring the ever-present John Carradine's son, David Carradine, taking up the vampire role. Folks seem to really enjoy this one. If Western comedy horror from the 90s is your thing, give it a watch.
Fangoria magazine produced the horror comedy Children of the Night in 1991.
And in 1992, we got Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
You guys like this one?
I do. I mean, I always have. I could say it's not perfect, but I love it.
The way that this list has been going, he really should be called Bram Stoker. I mean,
they're sexy beings, man. They're sexy creatures of the night.
In 1992, the Australian vampire film Bloodlust came out, and it is apparently ultra violent and controversial. The director saying about it, it's a purpose-made, market-driven, crass exploitation film, which all sounds great. So I have to check this one out.
Yeah, it people like it, man. In Grampire, My Grandpa is a Vampire. Nice title there. Released in 1992, a boy discovers his eccentric grandfather is a vampire who is played by none other than Al Lewis, who was the grandfather vampire in The Munsters, and is basically reviving his role there. So if you loved Grandpa in The Munsters, give it a watch.
Crazy.
John Landis directed Innocent Blood in 92, a comedy about a French female vampire in Pittsburgh fighting the mob.
That is an amazing movie.
Is it?
Yes.
I love John Landis. I don't know how I've never seen it.
Definitely check it out. It's really, really good. Okay. So now we have Buffy the Vampire Slayer, played by a Valley Girl, set in 1992 Southern California, and it was a big hit, and obviously everyone's heard about it, mainly because of the Joss Whedon series.
And in 1993, Guillermo del Toro's very first film, Kronos, starring Ron Perlman. I love this movie. So good. It's got a very interesting and unique take on vampirism. Must watch for horror fans.
Oh, it's fantastic. Is that his
So
first
good.
film, though? I thought Devil's Backbone was.
No,
I could be wrong.
you are wrong.
Okay. I've been wrong before, once.
Night Owl from 1993, a gritty black and white art vampire film about a squatter in New York City's Alphabet City, slicing the necks of models at underground clubs to drink their blood.
I've actually seen this next one, and it was like one of back in the day, really hard to find, and it's 1993's Darkness, which is just kind of a splatter fest of a movie, and it's pretty good.
It's famous for having the most exploding heads in any film.
It's into the 90s, you're kind of getting a lot of these, more extreme type, trying to outdo each other. And
it kind of went from sex to violence.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But it's good.
To Sleep with a Vampire in 1993, where a lonely vampire seeks salvation and redemption through a prostitute he meets on the gritty streets of Los Angeles.
And if you're an Adam and the Ants fan, check out Love Bites, The Reluctant Vampire in 1993. Ant stars and does the soundtrack.
Oh, interesting. Okay, here's a movie which I guess a lot of people like, and it's Interview with the Vampire. What do y'all think about Interview with the Vampire?
I mean, I like it. I've always liked it.
Yeah,
I haven't seen the new series. It looks interesting.
I haven't either. Yeah, I mean, I love Anne Rice. It's a good adaptation, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not really the biggest Tom Cruise fan.
I'm not either. I'm actually kind of the opposite of a fan. I've
Yeah,
just
me
never
too.
really liked him.
So you're a hater?
I mean,
Come on now, it's okay. We're all friends.
I'm not a hater because I don't care that much. I'm just like, I don't go out of my way to see anything that he's in.
Well, Peter Fonda picked up the role of Van Helsing in Nadja, a 1994 art film that was actually shot on a Fisher-Price toy camcorder. Just interesting.
What? No,
Yeah.
that cannot be real.
It's real, dude.
No
Peter
way.
Fonda. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to that just blows my
Nadja. Nadja. Go check it out, everybody. If you want to see
Nadja.
a movie made on a Fisher-Price toy camcorder.
with Peter Fonda in it of all people.
Yeah. Peter Fonda's
Oh.
awesome. I love that guy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Another gritty black and white vampire art film set in New York City is The Addiction, released in 1995, starring Lily Taylor, Christopher Walken, and Eddie Falco.
Edie Falco, actually, from The Sopranos.
Oh, Edie Falco. Sorry.
I remember this is another one that I could always get at the video store for some reason. Like in the lame ass, like the bad video store that had nothing good, they would always have this one.
And I think the stars have aligned where I get to talk about the very, very best vampire movie ever made. And clearly, I mean, there's no contest here. It's the Citizen Kane of vampire movies, and it's the Leslie Nielsen vehicle, Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Classic.
Mel Brooks. I've actually never seen this movie. I don't know how I skipped my scene.
Oh,
I will
man.
try to watch it. I'm sorry. I
Oh,
apologize.
wow, that's bad. Stop watching the porno ones and just watch that one.
I don't know if I can give them up. Blood and Donuts in 1995 features David Cronenberg as an actor playing a mafia boss in a story about a shy vampire awakening after centuries of slumber and trying to interact with this weird and wacky world.
Wes Craven brings us Vampire in Brooklyn in 1995, a comedy starring Eddie Murphy. A huge failure. Mocked by critics upon its release, it has since been reevaluated and become a cult classic.
And I'm just going to read this out verbatim, and then I'm going to ask Matt something. So, next up, Tales from the Crypt presents Bordello of Blood came out in 1996. Now, were you just kind of over writing some of the descriptions, or have you never seen it, or do you just hate the movie?
None of the above. I like it. I think it was fun. I thought it was really fun. I mean,
it's got what's the name of the comedian guy that's the main guy in it?
I haven't seen it in fucking 25 years, so it's, tough for me to remember. But the very same year, there was another Bordello vampire movie. You may remember Quentin Tarantino's From Dusk Till Dawn, which I have to say I liked a little bit better than Tales from the Crypt. Classic.
It's one of those movies where it's like two movies stuck together. Right. The first half is totally divorced from the second.
Jean Roland is still at it, bringing us a more erotic French art house with Two Orphan Vampires in 97.
Jean Roland has been bringing us sexy vampires for decades. Okay, also from Spain comes Killer Barbies, a Spanish girl punk rock band that has an accent while on tour, and they're forced to spend the night at an eerie castle of Countess von Fledermaus. The musicians soon realize that the mysterious lady's kindness hides a macabre, blood-curdling plans.
And John Carpenter's Vampires in 1998 with Cheryl Lee, who I just adore. A lot of people, for some reason, don't like this movie, but I thought it was awesome. It was John Carpenter's Vampires.
I find it middle of the road Carpenter. I think he lost his mojo by that point.
I don't know, that scene with Cheryl Lee all tied up and like showing her fangs at them, like, oh, it just gives me the shivers.
Jude Law starred in The Wisdom of Crocodiles, 1998, a highly acclaimed romantic vampire thriller.
Okay, and now we have Marvel bringing us Blade in 1998 with Wesley Snipes, who recently reprised his role.
Did he?
Yes, but I won't say where.
And we got From Dusk Till Dawn 2, Texas Bloody Money, 1999, as well as From Dusk Till Dawn 3, The Hangman's Daughter, both released in 1999.
With John Bon Jovi, right? Was it the second or third one?
I don't know. I didn't see them.
Yeah, no.
I don't know how I missed them.
I saw them in Sci-Fi, I think. It was Sci-Fi Channel back in the day.
Shadow of the Vampire in 2000, a fictional recount of the making of Nosferatu, starring Willem Dafoe as Max Schreck and John Malkovich as F.W. Murnau.
Excellent film. So good. So artistic. Beautiful.
So we're moving on to Wes Craven now, who brought us Dracula 2000, which is a reworking of Stoker's novel set in the year 2000. And it was a commercial and critical failure.
The Little Vampire in 2000 is a comedy based on the children's book series of the same name.
Vampire Hunter D, Bloodlust 2000, considered the peak of cell animation, an absolutely beloved anime must-watch for fans of animation.
In 2001, there was an interesting take on the vampire in The Breed, which is set in the future where vampires are a marginalized race living in formerly Jewish ghettos. What? Also, often shot in actual abandoned Jewish ghettos. Interesting.
Right? Vincent Gallo, remember him? He starred in Trouble Every Day in 2000, an erotic horror film.
Blade 2, directed by Guillermo del Toro, was released in 2002.
We have another Canadian movie called Dracula Pages from a Virgin's Diary, directed by Guy Madden, released in 2002. And it's a dance film documenting a performance by the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. Matt, did you like that one?
Of course. Killer Barbies versus Dracula in 2002 is the sequel to Killer Barbies, where the Spanish punk girl band's catchy tunes inadvertently awaken Count Dracula.
Genre brings French erotic lesbian vampire art films into the 21st century with Dracula's Fiancé. This would be the last of his vampire films, but he'd still be making movies until 2009.
Now we have the Anne Rice novel, Queen of the Damned, which was released in 2002.
It's vampires versus werewolves in Underworld in 2003. These were that one was a pretty popular one. I liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun, but it's pretty goofy. People love to hate it.
The Japanese science fiction vampire film Moonchild was released in 2003.
And now we go back over to Hong Kong, which brings us the vampire kung fu films into the 2000s with The Vampire Effect, released in 2003.
In 2004's Teenage Bikini Vampire, two worlds collide when a vampire girl falls for a surfer boy. This one sounds like fun if you can find it. It seems hard to find. But what a name. Teenage Bikini Vampire? Come on.
He was a skater boy. She said, suck you later, boy.
Succula.
Yep, just came to me. Carmilla, the lesbian vampire in 2004, is about the famous vampire Carmilla, but she's fighting zombies, and it is said to be so bad as to be unwatchable.
Marabito, in 2004, from Takeshi Shimizu, director of The Grudge. That was the one word I couldn't pronounce there. Director of The Grudge is a vampiric film heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. And if you like J-horror, definitely check it out.
So good. It's a great one. Lust for Dracula, 2004 porn film. Set in modern-day Los Angeles, but based on Bram Stoker's novel. Tagline is... Huh?
You totally called him Bram Stoker.
Oops.
No, leave it in.
All right, I'll leave it in.
That's what she said.
I got it. Ow, snapped. It's coming on hard and heavy.
Getting X-rated.
The tagline is, Mina Harker isn't the happiest of Hollywood wives. Mina longs for her husband Jonathan's love and the happiness a child would bring, yet the arrival of the beautiful and mysterious Dracula will change their lives forever. This one's streaming for free on Spank Bang. Check it out.
Not Spank Bank. Just
Spank Bang.
Blood-sucking redneck vampires in 2004 features midget vampires, oh gosh, waving Confederate flags. If you like that sort of thing, you shouldn't. But there it is.
They're just proud of their history.
Yeah.
Their vampire history.
In 2004, and I remember this movie coming out, a Russian movie called Night Watch, which was an urban fantasy with witches and creatures of the night. And it was actually pretty impressive. It might have been the first Russian movie I'd watched, maybe.
I liked it too. I thought it was really good. And Sweden makes their first vampire movie, Frostbite, in 2006, a comedy with over-the-top special effects by the same people that did the special effects in Russia's Night Watch.
Bram Stoker's Dracula's Curse in 2006 has nothing to do with Bram Stoker's Dracula or the Francis Ford Coppola movie, and was made by The Asylum, a film company that produces as many low-budget films as quickly as possible. The Asylum spends about 4 to 6 months making a movie, and since the company is not affiliated with any industry guilds, this means their employees will sometimes work upwards of 22 hours a day. Yikes.
And my apologies, Chris. I just have to correct you on a couple of pronunciations. It's Bram Stoker and Francis Ford Copulation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. In 2006, Ultraviolet was released, and it was described as remarkably a bad movie. But the guy that made it made one of my favorite sci-fi movies called Equilibrium. You've seen it with Christian Bale.
Oh no, I haven't.
You haven't seen Equilibrium? It is amazing.
Is it? I'll have to write that down. Underworld Evolution came out in 2006. More werewolves versus vampires.
30 Days of Night in 2007, one of my favorite vampire movies of all time. Based on the graphic novel where vampires come to Alaska to take advantage of the lack of daylight in the winter, and featuring my horror fave, Josh Hartnett.
I love it too. It's so good.
Yeah, and such a great idea to have vampires in the snow with all the blood on the snow.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
such a
blood on the snow is so
the
good looking.
visual, it's just amazing.
In 2007's Rise Blood Hunter, Lucy Liu plays a reporter who wakes up in the morgue to discover she is now a vampire. She vows revenge against a vampire cult responsible for her situation and hunts them down one by one.
Will Smith stars in the third adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend in 2007, the first of these films to use the actual real title.
The Irish Vampire Goes West features an Irish vampire who travels to Hollywood to rescue her daughter. This film contains a lot of Irish folklore, including fairies and witches and banshees. If Irish folklore is your thing, check it out.
It's actually really good.
Now we have the 2008 Czechoslovakian film, Bathory, Countess of Blood. And it supposes that Elizabeth Bathory was an herbalist and a healer who was not bathing in blood, but in water-colored red from herbs.
It's definitely a very hippie thing to take a bath full of herbs. I know a lot of people who do it. I Sell the Dead, an Irish 2008 comedy about grave robbing, because nothing is funnier than grave robbing. Just ask Ed Gein.
Let the Right One In, 2008, based on the novel by John I never pronounce his name right. Lindquist.
Yeah.
This is probably my favorite vampire movie of all time.
It's a good one.
I love it so much. And I love the book too. The book's a lot deeper, a lot more things happen. Just amazing, amazing stuff. Let the Right One In. Check it out. Buy the book. Watch the movie.
What did you think of the remake?
We're gonna get to it in a minute. I personally did not like it. I just didn't do it for me. Didn't have the magic.
Okay, well, we're coming on to my podcast co-host favorite vampire movie. So Jim absolutely adores Twilight, which came out in 2008. Like, the sparkly vampires is all he ever talks about, and it became a cultural phenomenon, and it brought new blood to the vampire in popular culture, and he was very much team Jacob or the other guy.
I have never seen it.
I've never watched it. I don't know. I'll have to ask Jim.
But my son, who is a cinephile, whose opinion he watches Ingmar Bergman movies. He's like, he watches like old black and white Russian films from the 1920s. He's actually like, you know what? Twilight's not a bad movie. You should probably give it a chance and watch it. So
I have heard that like the movies are very cinematic and like watchable, as opposed to the books, which are like so trash that you like don't even like the writing is super bad. So I don't know, take that.
You know what? Whenever Jim listens to this episode, he'll be so happy.
Okay. The Countess in 2009 is a French and German venture depicting the life of Elizabeth Bathory.
Daybreakers, a 2009 science fiction film with Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe, where the entire planet is overrun with vampires and an evil vampire corporation is farming out humans.
It's neat to see go from Dracula to this. You know what I mean? What an evolution we've seen today, you know?
That's a low-key great movie, Daybreakers.
I heard that.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we have the Gore Fest of a Vampire Girl versus Frankenstein Girl, which is a 2009 Japanese film based on the manga of the same name.
And another one, the Twilight Saga, New Moon.
Suck is a 2009 rock and roll black comedy featuring Henry Rollins, Iggy Pop, Alice Cooper, and Malcolm McDowell.
I do not know how that got by my radar. I have not. Have you seen it, Mark?
No. I've heard
Henry Rollins and Iggy Pop.
I'm not a big Iggy Pop fan, but I'm a big Rollins fan. I'm not a big Iggy Pop fan.
Get the fuck off the podcast.
Okay, bye. Okay, we have a slightly different vampiric take. We have 2009's Grace, which is an art film about a stillborn child that comes to life, but it will only take blood as nourishment. Very moody and atmospheric, dark, and highly recommended. A great example of the vampire mythos being subverted for the art film.
Have you seen this, Krista? Grace?
I haven't. No.
I'm gonna recommend it to you. It is fantastic. I
Okay.
really, really like this movie. It's very, as like a mother, I think you'll really appreciate it. Like this
Well, I like a
longing
lot.
to
I
feed.
mean,
Really good.
I think, yeah, I like a lot of like pregnancy, body horror. I mean, it sounds cool, so I'll check it out.
Grace. A Thirst is an excellent Korean horror movie about a Catholic priest vampire. If you like Korean horror, definitely check it out. Great film.
Underworld, Rise of the Lycans, 2009. That one just sort of is what it is.
I always feel like the Underworld movies are kind of like the Resident Evil movies. They're kind of bland and just like there. Not terrible, but not great.
I feel like it's a video game or something. Video game movie.
In 2009, we have the Eurotrash classic Red Scream Vampires. Theodora and Eleonora are 1,000-year-old vampires who haunt the long-abandoned Buffalo Central Terminal. They pick up a male hitchhikers and promise them a night of erotic excess. Once in the terminal, that promise quickly turns to slaughter and a blood-feeding frenzy, which is why it's the terminal.
That's some good copy there. Transylmania is a vampire horror comedy from 2009 that set a world record for the worst box office opening of all time. If you haven't heard of it, that's probably why.
Cirque de Freak, The Vampire's Assistant in 2009 is a dark fantasy film based on the Vampire Blood books by Darren Shan.
So apparently IMDb has the next movie a 2 out of 10, so it's probably pretty good. It's 2009's Vampire in Vegas, which sounds awesome.
Yeah,
really,
like leaving Las Vegas.
I mean, Vegas is all about the nightlife, so why wouldn't a vampire be there?
It's true, and you could probably sit in the casino all day and then go out at night.
Yeah, the casino could be the coffin.
Right.
The coffin casino. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Casinos are basically huge coffins. We Are the Night, a 2010 German lesbian vampire film that explores the idea of an all-female world.
Vampires Suck is a 2010 parody of the Twilight movies, which were still going strong as that same year brought us the Twilight saga Eclipse.
We have Vampires 2010, which is a Belgian mockumentary that apparently has won a lot of awards.
And Let Me In. I don't know why they changed the name since it's a fucking song lyric. Let the Right One In. Is a remake of Let the Right One In, and I didn't really dig it. I don't know, it just didn't have the magic.
And of course, there's the Irish movie Let the Wrong One In. No, there's actually a movie.
Oh, there is?
Yeah. It's a horror comedy, I believe.
Vampire is a 2011 Japanese art film about a biology teacher caring for his ailing mother who comes to believe he's a vampire and starts killing women and drinking their blood.
Another 2011 Japanese vampire art film is Sanguivarius. Though this one is extremely experimental and non-linear, it's basically a series of seemingly unrelated images accompanied by strange photographic effects. Interestingly, when it was the original, there was a live musical accompaniment with it, including traditional Japanese drumming.
Movies should do that more. Imagine going to the movies and there's a band there and like live music. Wouldn't that be neat?
Well, they used to have the organ there, right?
Yeah, or sometimes it's like an actual orchestra. They have an orchestra pit with an actual orchestra.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Midnight Sun is a highly acclaimed 2011 indie horror movie offering a new take on the vampire mythos. Set in modern day Los Angeles, it's about a man with a rare skin disease who cannot be in direct sunlight, and because of his anemia, begins to consume human blood, and the film centers on his love affair with a local bartender. I have not seen this, but it has been really recommended to me and is on my list.
It kind of sounds like the Romero one. Why am I not remembering? Martin. A little bit, maybe.
They remade Fright Night in 2011. I actually fucking love it.
Did you?
I do. I love Colin Farrell. Firth? Which one is it?
Farrell.
That's the one in that movie is the one I like. The other one is no good. And I liked the kid in it, the kid that passed away, unfortunately, very tragically. I really liked him as an actor. I just think it's like really fun. I mean, obviously the original is, the original, but I really enjoyed the remake.
So we're back to Ireland again, with 2012's Byzantium, which was highly acclaimed and highly recommended. And it's
a beautiful looking film, man. It goes over 200 years. It's also, they got like shots from the past, but then it comes to the present. Cool movie. A Kiss of the Damned in 2012 is said to be an erotic gore fest reminiscent of gaudy 70s horror flicks. You had me at erotic. Much beloved, a modern cult film.
Waiting for Dracula is about hedonistic Los Angeles vampires who lure victims with cocaine and cheap sex.
You had me at
when
cocaine.
I was living in LA in 2007, I could have been lured in with those things.
The next one is a historical pick. It's based on true events. And this is Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, which was released in 2012.
Dario Argento brought us Dracula 3D in 2012 with Rutger Hauer as Van Helsing.
Another damn Underworld Awakening, also 2012.
Okay, and people are often shocked whenever they hear that I have never seen the original series or watched this movie, but Tim Burton gave us his version of Dark Shadows in 2012.
I am a huge fan of the original television show, which I don't know if you'd even like it, Mark. It's really boring and it's like really bad. It's like you can see that the microphone, like a lot of times the sets literally fall apart. Like they'll shut a door and the door will swing back open because like but I adore it. I love it. But I did not like the Tim Burton version.
I feel like there's a lot of people like it for nostalgia, and I never saw it. So
yeah, I used to watch it as a little kid. I remember coming home from school and it would be on TV. But I just felt like Tim Burton I felt like he should have made it in black and white. There was a lot of issues I had with it. It just didn't feel like the original version. It was like Tim Burton being Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Just my opinion. Amy Heckerling made the comedy Vamps in 2012, starring Alicia Silverstone.
And Jim Jarmusch made a vampire movie in 2013, Only Lovers Left Alive. I actually this is not typically the movie that I like, this really super slow burn, but it's pretty beautiful. A gothic fantasy romantic comedy.
I'm a Jim Jarmusch fanatic. He can do no wrong in my eyes. He's definitely the slow burn for sure.
Yeah.
So, as most of us know, this director, Creeperson, who who directed the classic The Brides of Sodom, starring the gay porn star David Taylor. After the world has ended, a group of vampires feed on the last remaining humans left on the planet. Confusion arises when one of the lead vampires falls in love with a human that is meant for food.
Are you a big David Taylor fan?
I'll have to ask Jim about that.
Jim might know, yeah. Creeperson. What a name for a director.
Creeperson. What were their parents thinking? Their last name was Creeperson. Why,
No.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I met somebody just the other day that had the same first name as their same last name. What was it? I can't remember what it was. That is so weird when that happens. Fright Night 2 in 2013 went right to video. Did you see that one?
Negative.
No.
Dracula the Dark Prince in 2013, starring Jon Voight, sets to combine the historical Vlad the Impaler with the Dracula legend and was said to have, quote, lackluster direction, cheap sets, and poor CGI.
Sounds good.
And just the next year, in 2014, another film also set to combine the historical Vlad the Impaler and the vampire legend with Dracula Untold.
And acclaimed director Spike Lee, who I adore, remade the previously mentioned Ganja and Hess with Das Sweet Blood of Jesus in 2014, saying he wanted to make a film about humans addicted to blood. But somehow this one missed me. I have not seen it.
The fantasy comedy Vampire Academy, based on the book of the same name, was released in 2014 to much critical ridicule and little box office return.
And I think this has been set up, so I have to say the most difficult words. And we have 2014's Iranian vampire movie with Anna Lily Amapour's A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. And I haven't seen this, but I always
great.
I always go past. I always see the title and just for whatever reason
Have you seen it, Christa?
I have. I really liked it. I did. I was really tired the night that I saw it, and it had nothing to do with the movie because it was really good, but I feel like it deserves a rewatch from me.
New Zealand comedy duo Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi's mockumentary What We Do in the Shadows came out in 2014. A great mockumentary comedy about vampires, but the television show is even better, in my opinion. I love the television show.
And it's Taika Waititi. I just like saying his name.
I can't say his name, man. I don't know.
Taika Waititi.
I also used to watch that show. What was that TV show they had? The Flight of the Condors.
Flight of the Conchords.
Heard good things about that.
Fucking so funny, man.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Summer of Blood is a vampire comedy from 2014 with a big cult following.
Norway is a Greek black comedy from 2014 that the Hollywood Reporter called a feverish exercise in heavily stylized weirdness.
That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good, yeah.
Therapy for a Vampire is an Austrian comedy about Sigmund Freud psychoanalyzing a vampire. Sounds fun to me.
Freaks of Nature is a 2015 horror comedy about a high school where there are zombies and vampires.
Tales of Dracula is a 2015 indie horror film, filmed in black and white and very campy. It is Frankenstein's monster and the werewolf as well. If you like tongue-in-cheek, campy throwback horror, check it out. It's streaming on YouTube.
Underworld Blood Wars in 2016 would be the last of these Underworld films.
The Transfiguration is an arty indie 2016 release. Think Romero's Martin set in Brooklyn, and it has a cult following.
Manhattan Undying is a 2016 gritty New York vampire film. But this one is in color and pretty big budget. Really beautifully shot. The story is about a vampire who seeks out an artist to paint her portrait so that she can see her image for the first time. Oh, that seems kind of sweet.
Luiso, is that how you say that?
Sure.
Luiso
Vega keeps the
Jean Roland.
Luiso Vega keeps the French erotic weird vampire film alive with Dracula is Not Dead in 2017. This is some crazy shit. Very gory, very, very sexy, very French. If you like Jean Roland, this is keeping that whole spirit alive. Definitely give it a watch. Great film.
Ice-T stars in 2017's Blood Runners, set in 1933, about prohibition enforcement police battling vampires.
Oh, you're sober and have to battle vampires.
Dude, it's so he talks like Ice-T. It's like 1933, and he's like, "What up?" and shit, and he's got like a big diamond earring and shit.
Oh my god.
It's a great documentary. I love it. In 2019, there was another adaptation of Carmilla.
In 2019's critically acclaimed indie Bit, the lesbian vampire mythos enters the LGBTQ age when a young trans woman falls in love with a group of lesbian feminist vampires.
Another great 2019 take on the vampire is Bliss, where an artist seemingly gets a taste for blood and death after trying a new drug for inspiration. Very modern, Los Angeles, gritty, altogether different and artistic horror movie. Highly recommended.
And I'm gonna have Christa read the next one.
Yes, because Matt said we were going to focus on movies, but I did want to bring up Midnight Mass because it is probably my favorite vampire thing now of all time. I just love the Netflix miniseries Midnight Mass. So if you haven't seen that, that is my big recommendation for the night.
An atheist
for the episode.
Vampire movie. I love it, you know, where the bad guys are waving the crosses.
Yeah, it's great.
Now we have part of Barbara Crampton's renaissance into modern movies again. We have 2021's Jacob's Wife, which is described as a comic genre infected study of middle-aged female rage.
And in a similar vein, 2021's Red Snow tells of a struggling vampire romance novelist who must defend herself against real-life vampires during Christmas in Lake Tahoe. One of my
How the hell did I miss Red Snow? That sounds kind of cool. Is it terrible? Or do we know anything about it?
I don't know anything about it. No.
I just looked it up. It's got a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. I might check that out for
good.
my next viewing experience.
And I did like that you said in a similar vein.
But I'm bummed. In the Canadian. Oh, sorry. What did you say, Mark?
I just tried to hammer it home.
In the Canadian comedy Kicking Blood, a vampire tries to kick her addiction to blood after falling in love with a human alcoholic.
I kind of wish that was like a martial arts thing where a vampire like kicks somebody, so like they start bleeding and then they just beat on them.
Kicks her habit.
No, I know. But just kicking blood, I just had this picture of a vampire martial artist. Anyway.
That's messy.
So it's Morbin time. In 2022's Morbius, based on Marvel Comics, and it's terrible with Jared Leto.
Yeah, skip that one, man. And Jamie Foxx starred in 2022's Day Shift. A hardworking dad out to provide for his daughter uses a boring pool cleaning job as a front for his real gig, hunting and killing vampires.
The 2023 French-Canadian comedy, Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. A teenage vampire who struggles with the morality of killing people for their blood enters a pact with a suicidal boy on the condition that she must spend the night helping him finish the things he still wants to do before he dies.
Wow, that sounds like that German thing where the guy ate the other guy, right? the real life thing. The what?
Yeah, we covered them. We did that.
Yeah, we did.
Mm-hmm. Is it me?
Yes. The last voyage.
Okay. So the last voyage of the Demeter is based on the Captain's Log section of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I thought it was okay. I didn't have a problem with it. It was fine. It was just fine.
It looks good. I would really want to see it. Did you see it, Christa?
No.
No,
no, Renfield. No, I did see it, and I got.
They're not Renfield. Bored. The last voyage of the Demeter.
Sorry, that's what I meant. The last voyage of the Demeter, I did see, and I liked that one. Perfectly. Renfield, I did. We're getting to. I quit halfway through, but I liked last voyage of the. Yeah. I quit Renfield halfway through. I was bored, and I was really Disappointed that I was so bored because I was looking forward to it, but it just, I don't know.
Didn't
Also,
work
in the
out.
same vein of like how much I like, Colin Farrell and Josh Hartnett, and like I feel like if a good leading man carries a vampire film, it does a lot for me. But the dude that played Renfield, like I just can't stand him, so I just like didn't want to give it a
Nicholas
shit.
Holt.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
no,
I got halfway through Renfield and stopped to and never went back to it,
no.
which is weird because I like Nicolas Cage being all Nicolas Cagey, but yeah, didn't do it for me for whatever reason.
And it brings us to the present year, 2024. Here we are. Abigail, a big studio reimagining of 1936's Dracula's Daughter. Abigail, the daughter of a Russian mobster, is kidnapped and locked inside a mansion where the hunted becomes the hunter. I might watch that tonight with my daughter.
Let me know how you like it. Finally, the Canadian film Slay, where
No, you mispronounced it. It's Slay.
Oh, excuse me. Slay, where 4 drag queens booked at the wrong venue manage to win over an unfriendly crowd when they become the biker bar's defenders against a vampire attack. Sounds fun.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, you have it. The complete history of the vampire film. I'm sure a few got biased, but I mean, that is pretty much it, man.
Let's do a rapid fire out of all these films. What was your favorite? Matt.
Let the right one in.
Mark.
Near Dark.
Okay. And if I have to pick a film instead of the miniseries,
I know I changed it. It's Succula.
So I'm going to recommend.
What were you gonna say, Christa?
I was just 30 Days of Night. No
30
worries.
Days
of Night.
I said it during this.
I apologize. Sorry. I thought you said
No, it's
something.
all good.
So I'm going to recommend, because I'm from Northern Ireland originally, a Northern Irish movie called Boys from County Hell, which is a very different vampire take, but it's kind of based on Bram Stoker, and it's got a lot of Northern Irish humor. So you'll like it.
How did it miss the list? Ugh.
There's also Livid. Have you seen Livid?
I don't think so.
Livid is by the directors of Inside, the French. Have you seen?
Yeah.
L'Intérieur. It's another vampire movie. It's excellent. Waxwork. Love the vampire section. Love the vampire section in Waxwork. I don't know, Matt. You did a great job, but there is so we'd be here like for weeks if you have to go through every single vampire movie.
And on that note, we will not be here for weeks because I think we covered everything that we want our listeners to weigh in on, right? We got some great feedback with our werewolf episode last year and other suggestions from listeners. So I'm interested to see what people think of the movies we covered and what people's favorites are.
Most of them you can't watch in front of your children, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Especially the genre.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We will be back soon. And if you want to drop us a line or say anything to us, we're on social media. And you can also reach us at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. Ow!
That was my vampire hiss.